Howdy, y'all. This is Paul, the Redneck Thinker. What we have here is a channel to communicate. I want you folks to be thinking by the time you leave my videos. Why? Because I'm tired of people talking via what other people tell them to think. So, watch my video and enjoy the chance to think for yourself. Oh, and if you don't mind, like, subscribe, comment. And I've got a link tree down below that's got my social media, and it has my Patreon if you want to help out. Thank y'all. So I was listening to a Reason TV interview with one of the spokesmen for the Cajun Navy. He brought up the fact that the reason that FEMA acts the way that it does and is not the best at handling emergencies in the way that they need to handle emergencies is because they are limited by law. There's something called the Stafford Act. There has been addendums to it, but that is why FEMA acts the way it does. And so I'm going to cover the Stafford Act. I'm going to see what needs to be done, but we're going to go over the history of the Stafford Act, and we're also going to see where people can see as a way to improve it, because I've already gotten improvement. And part of it's from what this representative of the Cajun Navy had to say, because I agree with him. But we're going to get into the history. We're going to get into the Stafford Act itself. It's going to be a little bit long of a video, but I think by the time that we're done, you're going to find that it's worth it. Okay, so the history. This is from CSR Reports. Congress has long debated how much federal government should contribute to disaster relief and how much should be responsibility of states and other non-federal entities. Congress, executive agencies, and oversight bodies have gradually formalized cost-sharing arrangements for different types of assistance since the Disaster Relief Act of 1950 authorized standing federal disaster relief to affected communities in the United States. This history reveals several trends. First, the specified federal share for various programs has generally increased. Second, the enactment of statutory cost shares often respond to executive proposals to reduce federal shares for disaster relief. More recent statutory adjustments have focused on adjustments for particular entities, incidents, or projects. The Disaster Relief Act of 1950 required governors requesting federal assistance for disaster to certify that state and local governments had expended a reasonable amount on the incident. No specific cost share structured such assistance. Particularly severe disasters in early and mid-1960s prompted enactment of several supplementary disaster relief bills and generated congressional debate on the need for more comprehensive assistance that included assistance for restoring public facilities and damaged homes, among other losses. This debate accompanied proposals for individual states and affected communities to share part of the loss with the federal government, particularly amid the growing scope and scale of federal assistance. Cost-sharing requirements in Army Corps of Engineer programs, emergency assistance, federal aid, roads, and regional development assistance served as models for various disaster cost-share proposals. Okay, now going over to Wiki because, well, this is probably... Well, no, let's go to FindLaw. What is Stafford Act? Okay, history. Before 1950, Congress had to pass separate laws to deal with emergencies affecting the nation. But 1950, Congress passed a comprehensive federal disaster relief act upon a governor's request. Later in 1988, Congress passed the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, which provides funds for states. The president invokes the Stafford Act quite often, about 56 times a year during a recent 10-year period. It's used in response to disasters like Hurricane Katrina and Oklahoma City bombing. It's used less often for public health emergencies. Notable examples: Clinton invoked it for the West Nile virus in New York and New Jersey, and Trump invoked it for COVID-19. The Stafford Act outlines the need for state and local government agencies to create comprehensive pre-disaster preparedness plans. These mitigation plans and mechanisms must prepare them for intergovernmental coordination during federal operations. So basically, you're looking at, like in Tennessee, they've got FEMA, or Virginia's got FEMA, those kinds of things, and they're supposed to plan for these things. But there's only so much you can plan for, because like North Carolina and Tennessee, when they were hit with Helene, they're saying that was a once in a 1,000-year storm right there. So let's get a little bit more into what this Stafford Act covers. Okay, let's first go into what each section of the Stafford Act is. You got findings, declarations, and definitions. Disaster preparedness and mitigation assistance. Major disaster and emergency assistance administration. Major disaster assistance programs. Emergency assistance programs. Emergency preparedness. And a miscellaneous. Okay, those are the primary areas. Okay, what happens after an emergency is declared? After the president declares an emergency, FEMA will draft a document called the FEMA State Agreement. The agreement outlines several things, including period of disaster, areas eligible for assistance, type of assistance required, cost-sharing provisions, and other relevant terms and conditions. Everything's got terms and conditions. FEMA's regional offices have Regional Response Coordination Center. The RRCC coordinates initial regional and field activities after a major disaster or emergency declaration. The RRCC coordinates FEMA's operations and resource support during incidents, which could be a lot of why you see so many problems in certain areas is because, well, like Florida, Florida and Texas know how to handle a hurricane. So does the Gulf Coast. They're used to it. Along the coast, they're used to it. That's why it's usually easier to see those things handled. Okay, the kind of resources are available. The Stafford Act authorizes 3 types of assistance from federal government. These include the following: individual assistance. Assistance directly given to individuals and businesses affected by an emergency or disaster includes food, temporary housing, assistance, financial assistance, and repairs. Public assistance. Federal funding and expertise allocated to state, tribal, and local governments and certain private sector nonprofits. Notice they said certain. So you have to be authorized ahead of time, which is why people were complaining, oh, Samaritan's Purse gave money to FEMA. For Samaritan's Purse to be able to go into some of these areas without the headaches, you have to get into certain rigmaroles. That's the same with the Cajun Navy now. Cajun Navy has now got it set up where they're working with FEMA. But not every group is doing that because they're local and they're only dealing with what's going on in the local area. So FEMA is trying to keep them out, not because they're having to keep them out because of the law. That's just it. The local groups are having to work around FEMA because FEMA, by law, can only work with certain groups. Okay, FEMA will pay most of a state and local government's cost for the following: debris removal, emergency protective measures, road and bridges, water control facilities, and equipment and utilities. The Stafford Act ensures process for orderly and systematic distribution of natural disaster assistance for state and local governments. Notice how they stress that it's orderly and systematic distribution of natural disaster assistance to the government, but they don't say it's orderly and systematic for individuals. FEMA reforms its individual assistance program. The Stafford Act provides the statutory authority for most federal disaster assistance programs. FEMA programs provide most federal public assistance programs for disasters. In January 2024, the Secretary of Homeland Security and FEMA administration announced that FEMA is reforming its federal assistance policies. They want to cut red tape, get funds to people faster, and give people greater flexibility. I'm not even going to get to it. Establish new benefits providing flexible funding to survivors when they need it most, cut red tape and reach more people who need to rebuild, simplifying the application process to meet survivors' individual needs. Pursuant to the Stafford Act, FEMA administers grant programs to provide a system of emergency preparedness for hazards. But notice, several areas of the country have said, oh, we're getting turned down whenever we're asking for that $750 or whatever. So they're claiming that they're doing these things, but the assistance programs seem more along the lines of they're able to turn you down faster. So that is that. And from the disasterphilanthropy.org, but we'll go into that here in just. Okay, we're going to get into what some people see as failures. NYU website, New York University website. One of their professors by the name of Mitchell Moss, several major areas, but not recognizing 21st century threats such as chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological attacks or accidents as legal grounds for a major disaster declaration by the president. Failing to establish a difference between scale of rural and urban disaster. The Stafford Act offers the same level of aid for a blizzard in a rural community as it does for a major earthquake in a metropolis. He recommended to Congress amend the definition of major disaster to recognize 21st century threats, which I'd already covered, create level of disaster specifically for catastrophes to cover incidents such as Hurricane Katrina and September 11th, and to provide increased levels of aid beyond that provided at major disaster level. Eliminate the $5 million cap on tax recovery assistance for state and local governments. Allow FEMA to pay in part or in full the salaries of public employees in areas stricken by catastrophe, and expand coverage for utility providers to include private and for-profit corporations. Provide expedited microgrants and loans to small businesses to help defer immediate costs. Following catastrophe, waive proof of insurance requirements and provide immediate assistance to those in need, which can later be reimbursed to the government when insurance payments are made. Okay, so that's one area. Disaster philanthropy that I said I was going to get into. They say the Stafford Act does not adequately address long-term recovery following a disaster. This is where private dollars become critically important. Donors can employ the following strategies to complement existing federal assistance programs. Support recovery. In order to increase the effectiveness of long-term recovery, the shortcomings of the Stafford Act must be addressed. Philanthropists can use their convening power to organize donor consortiums to advocate for legislative reforms of the Stafford Act and to ensure FEMA delivers a long-term recovery framework. Next, help-affected individuals and households receive case management and mental health services. Next, provide small business with expedited loans and grants. Okay, so these folks agree with the NYU person. Advocate for Stafford Act reform. In the years to come, the U.S. will certainly confront the devastation of additional natural disasters and may well have to respond to a man-made catastrophe like the 9/11 attacks. Donor community can play a vital role in disaster response, not only filling funding gaps, but also by advocating for Stafford Act reforms, yada, yada, yada. Okay. And there's another failure. One of the ways that many locales have found that FEMA does not do a good job on is the fact that they don't have an immediate emergency response. Like what happened with Helene in Northeast Tennessee and Western Kentucky. Or Kentucky, Western Carolina, sorry. Uh, they waited until the weekend was over because by law, they don't have groups that go out immediately when a disaster strikes and start helping. This is part of the law. They can't do that. That's why Samaritan's Purse and all these other private organizations look so much better than FEMA. Why the Cajun Navy looks so much better than FEMA. Because FEMA had, even after the emergency declaration, all of that, they have certain loops that they have to jump through. So that's another problem with Stafford Act. Now, one of the major things that they have found is that FEMA is not closing out emergency response, whatever they call them, their tickets or their projects. They're not closing them out correctly. So that's billions of dollars that has been waiting. It's not going to be used. They know it's not going to be used, but because the paperwork's still active, so to speak, this is billions of dollars that is being held back. That's one problem. That's something that the Inspector General of the Department of Homeland Security found. Another is that's being worked on. I don't know how well it's going to be worked on, but let me tell you, I can tell you who would push it, whereas others would not. Now, there needs to be a fix to the Stafford Act, and anybody that's listening to this that have an in with some of these members of Congress, there needs to be an emergency response team that goes out right when it happens and is starting to find ways to get things handled, is on the ground actually doing work. Some areas of Western Carolina and Northeastern Tennessee saw some folks, but if you listen to these videos, weeks after Helene hit, they still hadn't seen anybody from FEMA. They were barely seeing any government out there. This needs to change. But then again though, take a look at the road for Chimney Rock. They were going, oh, it's going to take months to be able to get all this done. And them boys from West Virginia, let me tell you, them rednecks, because that's what they were. They some rednecks. Brought in the equipment, their own equipment, and they put a road into Chimney Rock. FEMA needs fixed. To fix FEMA, you have to fix the Stafford Act. So, ladies and gentlemen, I don't care what your political persuasion is. Think about this. There are areas that rarely ever get a natural disaster, like what happened with Helene in the 1,000-year storm that hit the Appalachians. That rarely happens in a lot of places. People weren't prepared. And FEMA is supposed to know how to handle this. It takes more than, emergency preparedness training and all that. No, it takes boots on the ground. There comes a point that some member of Congress needs to start working on this. Whether they will or not, that's an entirely different thing. But those of you that are listening, hey folks, let's get this done. We as the American people need our money to be handling our problems. And that's what this is. This has been Paul, Redneck Thinker. I know this was a lot of information, but I want you to think about it because this can affect you. Y'all have a good day now. Bye. folks, I just want to say thank you for listening. I want to thank you for taking your time. I want to hear what your comments are about what you think on this topic, because your comments are what's important, not necessarily mine. I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're conservative. I don't care if you're liberal. I don't care if you're Democrat. I want to hear your opinion on these topics. I want to thank you yet again for listening to my video. Like, subscribe, and all that other hoopla. This has been Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Y'all have a good day now. Bye.